A shootout at a high-profile gathering in the U.S. Capitol and a dark joke by one of America's leading comedians have led to a massive controversy. Well, President Donald Trump is calling for ABC to fire late-night host Jimmy Kimmel over a joke about First Lady Melania Trump. Now, the joke, made a couple of days before the shooting incident at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, referred to Melania Trump as, quote-unquote, expectant widow. In a monologue on Thursday, Kimmel had portrayed himself as the MC of the upcoming banquet. It included a segment in which he addressed the First Lady in the audience and said, "Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow." Well, reacting to the video, Trump said Kimmel should immediately be fired by ABC and parent company Walt Disney. In a post on Truth Social, he said, and I'm quoting, "Appreciate that so many people are incensed by Kimmel's despicable call to violence and normally would not be responsive to anything that he said, but this is something far beyond the pale." Well, earlier hitting out at Kimmel, Melania Trump said his monologue about her family wasn't comedy. She said, and I'm quoting again, "His words are corrosive and deepens a political sickness within America," as she called on ABC to take a stand. Now, the late-night host, however, claimed his joke has been misconstrued, and was not a call to assassination. He said his quip that Melania Trump had a glow like an expectant widow referred to the difference in ages of the First Lady and her husband. Listen to this.
It was a pretend roast. I said, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at her, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow, which obviously was a joke about their age difference and the look of joy we see on her face every time they're together. It was a very light roast joke about the fact that he's almost 80 and she's younger than I am. It was not, by any stretch of the definition, a call to assassination, and they know that.
Well, Kimmel said he agreed with Melania Trump's call on dialing back the rhetoric, but pointed out that she should talk to her husband about it first.
But I understand that the First Lady had a stressful experience over the weekend, and probably every weekend is pretty stressful in that house. And also, I agree that hateful and violent rhetoric is something we should reject. I do, and I think a great place to start to dial that back would be to have a conversation with your husband about it.
Now, Trump has pushed all the barriers of presidential language during his tenure. Just last month, Trump has said that he was glad that Robert Mueller, was the former FBI chief who led the Russiagate probe, was dead. The media are a favorite target of Trump. Trump has often berated female journalists, calling one, I'm quoting here, piggy. The president had threatened to bomb Iran, saying, and I'm quoting again, "Whole civilization will die tonight," while using the derogatory term in many of his Truth Social posts. Well, Trump's latest criticism has set up a major free speech stress test for Disney and ABC amid ongoing public scrutiny of how major corporations respond to presidential pressure. Last year, ABC had suspended Kimmel following government pressure after he said Trump's hard-right MAGA movement was trying to make political capital from the assassination of right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk. All right, to discuss more about this, we're being joined by Jennifer Ewing, live from London, who is a spokesperson for the Republicans overseas UK. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Now we have a statement from Kimmel, who has now justified why he said that. He said that the original joke was a light roast about the 23-year age difference between president and his wife. Do you think if the shooting did not happen, the joke would have taken a different angle, perhaps the way Kimmel thinks it was?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't think either one of us can say what Kimmel meant by his joke, and quite frankly, I don't think it matters. If you are a free speech absolutist, which I am, Jimmy Kimmel has the right to tell whatever distasteful jokes he wants. And as long as the ABC and Disney, you know, the channel which he is and their advertisers are okay with that, and the laws are okay with that, then let the market decide what people think is appropriate or not. I think anytime you get a situation like this, it brings out tremendous amounts of hypocrisy from both the left and the right. You know, people on the left have been calling the President Trump, Hitler and a fascist and authoritarian for years and years and years. And then he fights back with bombastic language, and then people get upset. And then things happen on the opposite side, and, the other side reacts. So if you do believe that the First Amendment, people have the right to say whatever they want, then Jimmy Kimmel has the right to say that. Now, President Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump also have First Amendment rights. So they have every right to write what they did on Truth Social or call for ABC to Jimmy Kimmel being fired. Whether or not ABC will do that, I don't know that. I think, they are a business, and they will probably let their viewers decide what they do. You'll recall he did get suspended, I think you mentioned it slightly, last year after the Charlie Kirk assassination, and he had misspoken and said that it was a MAGA person. And that was not the government that got him suspended. It was actually ABC affiliates did not like that sort of political rhetoric. So again, it's the marketplace doing the job.
Then do you think that probably Melania Trump and Donald Trump may have overreacted to the joke, considering the fact that, of course, it was a joke that was aimed, of course, at these two people, but then even before the incident even happened? I've never had an assassination attempt on my life, nor have I been sitting next to somebody who was. Let's not forget that there have been 3 attempts on the president's life. That's a lot. And so I can't imagine to feel, to know what she must feel like. And again, she has every right to lash out and be upset and say, I do not find this joke funny, because, again, we're going back to hypocrisy. We've listened to the people on the left say that, it was Trump's rhetoric that caused January 6th, or it was Trump's rhetoric that caused this. So I think both sides, ideally, all sides, should reel in, this sort of negative political rhetoric. But once we start policing speech, that is a very slippery slope, and one that I'm, even though I voted for the president and I feel terrible, what's happened, these attempts on his life, I do not think that he should have the power, nor does he, quite frankly, to see that Jimmy Kimmel is fired. And so according to you, because of course it's a jest or maybe it's crossing the red line, where do you think the line should be drawn? And because of course when it comes to Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, they have been throwing these jokes for years now. And if you look back at Jimmy Kimmel, who hosted the 2012 dinner, he had been throwing jokes even at Abraham Lincoln or Obama, who was sitting on the dais there itself. So where do you draw the line when it comes to comedians and free speech?
I don't draw the line. We don't have hate speech laws in our country. We have something called the Brandenburg test, which is it's a very, very difficult line to cross in order for the speech to be legal. The hate speech has to be likely and imminent, right? So most jokes do not cross over into that. What I would point out, though, is the ratings for a lot of these comedians are not very good. We're no longer living in the 1990s or 80s or even before then, where we had these wonderful late night comedians that oftentimes were equally political. They sort of ripped on whoever was in power, but they brought the country together. The comedians we have these days are very political and divisive, and it shows in their ratings. People oftentimes want to listen to humor, to laugh, whether it's at their own side or the other side, but they do not want these political lessons. You'll see that Jimmy Kimmel and a lot of these comedians got very into trying to, shame people who did not want to get the COVID injection and that sort of thing. And the audience turned off. They do not like that sort of thing. They want their comedians to be funny. And if every single joke is just based on political hate, one-sided, it's not that funny.
And that's interesting because when you say that when it comes to ratings, well, when Jimmy Kimmel came back after he was suspended after the Charlie Kirk joke, it was a show that actually reached way more higher ratings than many of his other shows got. But beyond this, when we look at the comments coming in, of course, these are comedians who are throwing jokes, but then we also have President Trump who's making remarks of eliminating entire civilization. Do you think that, when it comes to looking at comments, it should be treated equally when it comes to jokes thrown by comedians, but also political statements made by, by Trump, who is the president of the United States and holds a very important role in the global politics and, of course, diplomacy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a much different subject, and you're not going to get me to defend what the president said about calling for the end of the Iranian civilization. So I will not at all say that is an acceptable way to speak. We do have, over a decade now of Trump, who speaks in an oftentimes blunt, bombastic, inappropriate, unpresidential way, which has not been great for a lot of those of us who are, in fact, who had voted for him, who have tried to defend him. It detracts from what is often a good message. By the way, I don't mean in the Iranian case. But again, as a free speech absolutist, it has to be up to people, whether it's people in power, like politicians who are in power, like indeed the president, or comedians, to just maybe use a better judgment, take some personal responsibility and think about how might this be construed, and is this the most effective way I can get my message across? Because if you look at our country as kind of a 50-50 country in the US, you're going to, whatever Jimmy Kimmel said, half the country is going to be happy with it, perhaps half the country is not. Michael Jordan, I don't know if you guys know him, very famous basketball player from the Chicago Bulls. He was a spokesperson for Nike shoes, and they tried to get him to do a lot of leftist advertising during those days, and he famously said, hey, Republicans buy shoes too. So the point being is, just from a marketplace, it's probably smarter to think about, if we live in a 50-50 world, why would I want to offend half my audience, whether it's legal or not?
Talking about ABC News, they did remove Kimmel and put him off air for some time, about like 1 week or so. And that was obviously after the call by Trump. At this time, Trump and Melania both have called for removing Kimmel. Do you think that ABC will be listening to that, or is there some kind of pressure that comes to these media houses when there's a remark from Trump calling out comedians to put them off air?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my personal view is I hope they do not. And the reason is you just correctly pointed out, Jimmy Kimmel had a boost in his ratings after the last time ABC suspended him. So I think Jimmy Kimmel wants this fight. He wants nothing more than to say, hey, I'm this, great, basically advocate for free speech, which he wants this fight with the president, because it's not going to look good, because most people are going to realize, hey, we do not want to lose our First Amendment rights. So my personal view is I hope ABC does not pull him off because of anything the president or the First Lady said. If, however, like last year, the case that you mentioned, if the advertisers to the ABC show, if the poll ratings, if there's internal pressure from local news affiliate channels and they say, hey, this guy's gone too far, that's a different matter, because that's the market speaking. That's not the government.
All right, of course, where there's a red line or a dark humor, there have to be a line or not. Well, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But thank you so much for joining on the broadcast. And
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks.